So today's notes, we are finding zeros of our quadratics using the square root method. You can go ahead and write your name on here and your hour in case they don't get put into your notebook. They get glued in just like completely flat, so there's no reason why you can't do that. Just a reminder from yesterday. This is what a quadratic looks like. This is what a quadratic looks like. Today, what we're doing is we are going to begin finding the zeros. So that's going to be these two spots. So in quadratics, we find what are called the zeros. Zeros are the same thing as x-intercepts, are the same thing as solutions. So I'm going to write that down here, that zeros are the same thing as x-intercepts, are the same thing as solutions. So those three words mean the same thing. It's basically our answers to our problems. So zeros, x-intercepts, and solutions, all three of those are correct ways to say this. And I want to tell you that so that way if you see it said another way, that you know that they're right too. Okay. We use the method that we are learning today when the value of b is 0, and therefore there's only two terms. So, yesterday we had ax squared plus bx plus c. Today, we're just going to have the ax squared and the c. The ax squared and the c. So the method we're using for today only works when we just have two terms. Okay, here are our steps. Here's what we're doing. We're going to find the zeros or x-intercepts or solutions of each quadratic below using the square root method, and we're going to show our work like always. The steps for solving this. The first thing we do is we replace the f of x equals with a 0 equals. And I actually moved these all to the left side of the box because here is something that makes it super easy. We like to solve equations with our x on the left. So the first thing that I do on all these problems is instead of having f of x equals, I cross that out and I put equals 0 and I go ahead and put that on the right. So then it's the way we like to solve it. So I'm setting it equal to 0. Then the next thing I do is I isolate the x squared. So when you isolate something, that means get it by itself. So I'm going to get x squared by itself. So that's going to be two steps. It's just like solving a normal equation. We're just solving for x squared instead of solving for x. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add 75 to both sides. On the left side, I have 3x squared now. And on the right side, I have 0 plus 75, which is 75. I would say this one is a little more easier. Yep, no, I said that at the beginning. Yes, Michaela?
I know what to do next.
Okay. Divide by 3. You got it. So we're going to divide by 3 to get our x squared by itself. So then we have x squared equals, and 75 divided by 3 is 25. So get there, pause. Let me know if you have any questions up until there. We're not going to move on yet. We will in a second. Okay. Any questions about everything up until here? We've now done steps 1 and 2. Okay, step 3 is a new step that some of us may have done and some of us may not have done. The step 3 is to square root both sides of the equation. So now that we have x squared by itself, x squared, or squaring something, is the opposite operation of a square root. So a square root symbol looks like this. I'm going to put both sides underneath the square root symbol. That square root and that squared cancel each other out. So x is now by itself. Then we have to take the square root of 25. So what that means is you're asking yourself, what number times itself equals 5? Oh, I just said it. What number times itself equals 25? 5. Okay. But remember how those quadratics had 2 x-intercepts? What other number times itself also equals 25?
1.
Read the thing underneath step 3 there.
-5.
Yes, so -5 times -5 is also 25. So for these problems, you're always going to have 2 answers. It's going to be the same number, positive and negative. So instead of having to write 5 and -5, we're going to use this fancy thing called a plus or minus sign. You literally put a plus sign and a minus sign, and that means my answer could be +5 or -5. That's called a plus or minus sign. You'll use them in math a lot from here on out, now that we're working with quadratics. And so our answer here is x equals plus or minus 5. Okay. Any questions right now about that first example? Okay, we're going to keep going. We're going to speed up a little bit now that we've seen that first one and we've seen each step. So it's the same steps every time. So step 1 is to get rid of the f of x equals. And I like to put my equals 0 over here on the right because that's easier for me to solve. This one, the first thing I need to do is get rid of the plus 98. Opposite of plus 98 is minus 98. So I'm going to subtract 98 from both sides. I get negative 2x squared equals 0 minus 98 is negative 98. And then I'm going to divide by negative 2. That leaves me x squared on the left. And on the right side, negative 98 divided by negative 2. Negative divided by negative is positive. And 98 divided by 2 is 49. Okay, then once we get x squared by itself, that's when we get to take the square root. You cannot take the square root until x squared is by itself. So we take the square root, take the square root, and then what number times itself equals 49? And so it's going to be plus or minus 7. I want to show you guys if you, especially when we get to bigger numbers, most of us know our perfect squares up to like 64, 81, 100. But then when we get to bigger numbers, sometimes we're like, wait, is that a perfect square? So if you need to calculate it, in your calculator, your square root button is over here on the left above the x squared button. Makes sense because they're opposites of each other. So you have to hit second and then the x squared button, and it'll come up with a little square root symbol, and then you would type in 49. And you would get 7. The calculator is going to tell you 7. You've got to know that negative 7 is also an answer. Okay, any questions right now? Okay, we've got 2 more. Next one's pretty straightforward. Last one, something kind of weird happens. So let's get these next 2 done. Talk me through this next one. Somebody, what's the first thing I should do on this 5x squared minus 20? Get rid of the f of x and make it equal to 0. And then Katie, what were you saying? Add 20 to both sides. And I've got 5x squared. You're going too fast for me. I've got 5x squared equals 20 now. Now, Michaela,
5.
divide by 5. And I've got x squared equals 4.
And square root it.
And then square root both sides. What number times itself equals 4? 2. Plus or minus 2. I almost forgot my plus or minus. So you get x equals plus or minus 2. Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay. We've got one more problem. And the reason why I put this last problem on here is because of that negative x squared. So there's an imaginary 1 there that we can't see because it's not there. So I'm going to put that in because that's going to help me here in a second. So I'm going to cross out my f of x equals and put my equals 0. I need to subtract 169 from both sides on this one. I get negative 1x squared equals negative 169. If you forget that negative, then you're not going to have it to divide by, and then you're not going to be able to take the square root of a negative number. Because you can't take the square root of a negative number, because a positive times a positive is positive, and a negative times a negative is negative. So if you try to put square root of a negative number in there, it's going to tell you that it's an error, because it's not a thing. There's no number that times itself equals negative. So that's why we have to divide by this negative 1 now. And we get x squared equals positive 169. Then we get to take our square roots. Anything we do to one side of the equation, we've got to do the other. What number times itself equals 169? 13. You got it. Plus or minus 13. And if you didn't know that off the top of your head, you could use your calculator. You would put second square root of positive 169, and it'll tell you 13, and then you put the plus or minus on. Okay. Quick, easy Friday notes. Any questions right now?
No.
Okay. Go ahead and glue these into your notebook. I'm going to stop the video. We will come around with assignments.